A potential political bombshell in the U.S. presidential race. The FBI reopens its investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails just 11 days before the election. Iraqi security forces advance towards Mosul in a mission to retake Iraq's second-largest city from ISIL. And Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte breaks his alliance with the United States to begin a new chapter with China. We'll discuss these stories and more. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. As we turn the pages on the last few days of October, we'll explore some of this month's biggest stories with a panel of distinguished journalists. Joining us from Ithaca, New York, is Raza Rumi. He's a Pakistani columnist, policy analyst, and journalist. Here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio is my colleague, Wang Guan. He's the chief political correspondent with CCTV Image Service. From Seattle, we're joined by Magnus Halldórsson. He's a journalist and the founder and co-owner of Kjánin, a digital magazine based in Reykjavik, Iceland. Also with us in the studio is Afshin Malawi. He's a senior fellow at Johns Hopkins University Foreign Policy Institute and co-director of the Emerge 85 Lab, a new platform for voices from Latin America, Asia, and Africa. Great panel. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Afshin, let's start with this news that came out on Friday afternoon, that the FBI is again looking at Hillary Clinton. Again, it's about emails. We don't know whether this is an investigation of a formal kind. There's still debate over that. But this email issue, we thought that this was an issue that had been put to rest. Here it comes again. How damaging is it going to be to her?
Well, it seems like, already, Trump had lost a lot of wind in his sails over the past month because with his own scandals, with the tapes that came out that showed him speaking in a very crude manner about women. And he's gotten some wind back in his sails. And even over the past few days before this email scandal broke, we saw the polls tightening. But I think the fact that we have this Anthony Weiner, the disgraced former congressman, and involved in this, because as you know, the case, the FBI was investigating his computer, and they found potentially some emails that were sent from Hillary Clinton's top aide, Homa Abedin, from that computer. And why not? I mean, this election has been such a circus, so why not bring Anthony Weiner into this? And 11 days before the election, the FBI director takes this unprecedented step. It is fitting in this circus-like atmosphere of this campaign.
All right, Wang Guan, we've had this happening 11 days out from the election. It's pretty unprecedented. The FBI saying that they discovered emails which they call pertinent to the investigation. Could we have a situation, and we know that the election's only 11 days away, this FBI inquiry is not going to be done by then. Could we have a situation where, let's say, Hillary Clinton gets elected? She's going to be a president or president-elect who's going to be under investigation by the FBI.
Well, right, and then we saw that even conservative forecasts saying that Hillary Clinton had a 21% chance of winning. But this thing really, the email revelations, they really complicated the matter. And Donald Trump today really seized on it. And this afternoon in the rally in Maine, he used to say that this election is rigged and the FBI was corrupt. But today, all of a sudden, he switched his tone, saying that FBI is great, has respect for FBI. So we don't know where it is going, but we do have instances where a sitting U.S. president was prosecuted, had charges against him, such as Bill Clinton, who was later not impeached or prosecuted further. Or we have President like Richard Nixon, who was prosecuted and later resigned. So we really don't know the content of these emails. Does it have to do with Benghazi? Does it have to do with classified information? We don't know. So it really, I think, depends on the content of the emails to say what's going to happen next.
Raza Rumi, this announcement comes only days after WikiLeaks cables linked the Clinton Foundation to claims of personal enrichment. Does it, no matter whether these are true or not, but does it reinforce a widespread perception that the Clintons are in it for themselves, or as Trump puts it, they're corrupt and dishonest?
Well, I would certainly not agree with that harsh judgment by Mr. Trump. But certainly the WikiLeaks revelations and now this ongoing emails puts a question mark on Ms. Clinton's credentials. But having said that, her rival unfortunately has made such statements and also has mobilized the American public that even these last-ditch efforts will not really impact Clinton's ascent into presidency. By all accounts, all polls are showing that she is way ahead, and it is likely that she's going to win the elections, notwithstanding these various kinds of charges. But we must also not forget that, Hillary Clinton has been under extraordinary scrutiny, and in part, I believe that it has to do with her being a woman in a primarily men's political world.
Magnus, you are an online journalist. You work for an online outlet in Iceland. Do you think the world is really concerned about these emails and what Hillary Clinton has sent and received? What do your readers make of the elections in general and with this latest revelation in particular?
I think the people in Europe, not just in Iceland, but in Europe, they are a little bit scared of what is going on in the United States, and this is just part of a circus and a campaign which has been a very big fight. And it's very difficult to say what they are looking into, and we're only 10 days to the election, so it's difficult to say what impact this will have. But I think this is just part of a very and extraordinary campaign and a very big fight that is going on.
Okay, I want to stay with you for the next point of discussion on the show, and that is the national parliamentary election in Iceland. Now, you have the Pirate Party in Iceland, described in some places as a group of anarchists, hackers, and activists, but they're doing very well in the opinion polls, and it is possible that they could form the next government in Iceland. I want you to take a listen to the party's leader, Birgitta Jónsdóttir, and she says she wants to change Iceland's dysfunctional system. Let's watch.
People are looking, is Iceland going to be brave enough to say no to this corruption bloc that is affiliated with the governmental parties and vote for change? Or are they not ready yet? I hope they're ready.
So, Magnus, what can you tell us about this party, the Pirate Party, and why are they so popular?
If we look at the elections in 2013, the Pirate Party got 3 members of the parliament out of 63. But the polls are saying now that it's very likely that they will have 10 to 15. And that make them in a key position to make a new government. And there is more likely that they will be looking to the left than to the right. But they describe themselves as a movement which is not a right one or a left one. They want to make big changes in the political system in Iceland. They have been talking about that, but it's difficult to say what will happen after the election. This is a group which has been skyrocketing in polls now for months, and I think they are in difficult position now when it comes to making a new government, because there are not every parties that are ready to work with them, and we will see what happens. A lot of young people have been voting for them. If we look at the polls, their biggest fan base is young people, and this is part of a situation which has been happening after the financial crash in Iceland in 2008. We have had big changes in every election since, and this is just a continuing process. It's difficult to say what will happen after a very interesting election day tomorrow.
And actually, I'm wondering, as Magnus told us, there's a lot of young people voting, whether there's a lesson in there for the rest of the world.
There might be, and I think the lesson for the rest of the world is it's actually good to be an anti-establishment candidate these days. And so, actually, Donald Trump had a chance to win this election here in the United States as an anti-establishment candidate if he were not such a clumsy anti-establishment candidate. And all across the world, and it's not just Iceland, it's in Italy, and it's in France, and it's in all across Europe and elsewhere, we're seeing anti-establishment candidates emerge. Now, I often say be careful what you wish for, because the warm glow of righteous indignation as you're bashing the establishment is easy. Actually governing and delivering is hard. Just ask the Syriza party in Greece, who were it's similar to the Pirates Party in the sense that they were anti-establishment. They won, and then they had to actually get the Greek debt under control, and that's a lot harder than chanting slogans.
Right, but I want to ask you one other thing about the Pirate Party getting into government in Iceland. Iceland is a member of NATO.
Yes.
How does NATO handle that? How does the United States handle that?
That's the key question, Anand. There's so much that is happening in the world that is changing, and particularly with NATO. I mean, you have a candidate here in the United States,
right,
the Republican nominee, who's saying that if the United States is going to question its very commitment to NATO if people don't pay up. He's adding dollars and cents. So NATO in a sense is no longer what it was 10, 15 years ago.
And Wangguan, as Afshin says, this is not an isolated thing, what's happening in Iceland. It's happening throughout the world. We see many other countries. We see anti-establishment candidates getting into power. Are we looking at some kind of major realignment in world politics right now?
Well, yeah, for a while, the Chinese intellectual circle was hoping that Donald Trump somehow could make his way into the presidency, because Donald Trump said he would realign the strategic posture against China in Asia Pacific, and part of his anti-establishment proposals was to just do that. So we saw that it's not just people like Donald Trump or people over there in Europe who are anti-establishment. Donald Trump actually has been anti-institutions of this country. The institution, the media, what he calls rigged, and and also it's anti the election system itself, calling the elections itself been rigged. Right. Which is a very harsh and rare accusation.
Yeah, there are all kinds of reasons people come up with for this wave of anti-establishment rhetoric that we're hearing. Raza Rumi, much of this populism has been blamed on political philosophy, really, blamed on neoliberal policies, blamed on globalization. Many people feel that they've been left behind by these policies. It's only benefited the rich. Do you believe that to be the case?
I think I absolutely agree with that assessment, because globally the liberal democracy project is under danger, largely because of the neoliberal economics that has been underwriting it. And also, if you look around the world, in Europe and in the US, the sort of income levels have been stagnated for most, and inequalities have grown over the decades. And that is one of the key reasons that the younger generations are started to questioning the way things are, and in particular how democracy project has been hostage to special interests or corporate interests, and how these processes are subverted. I think there's a lot of anxiety among the young people, and I think the Pirates Party is no exception. I mean, it's happening even in the developing world, where new populist movements are challenging the old order. So I think it is time to perhaps rethink the whole idea of the way democracies have been constructed and the way they have been managed. Otherwise, there's a global challenge to be met here.
Okay, let's move on to Iraq. This is the war that never ends. Now we have the battle for Mosul, a stronghold of ISIL. Afshin, we're hearing that Iraqi and US forces have made pretty significant gains to retake the city. But we're not hearing about what happens afterwards. What happens when this city is liberated?
Well, you've hit on the key question, Anand, because everyone always knew that retaking Mosul was going to be the, let's put it this way, relatively easy part, right? Because, when you have U.S. air power, you have a pretty strong Kurdish Peshmerga forces, reconstituted Iraqi army, and once the Shiite militias get into ISIS is not going to be able to withstand that kind of offensive. But, what they're going to do is meld back, they're going to try to find the next ungoverned space, and they're going to try to reconstitute. And it doesn't take much for ISIS, because they can just wreak havoc through terrorist attacks. But I think that the fact that Mosul will be retaken will be of symbolic importance. And what Iraq needs to do, and what needs to happen in Syria, is ungoverned spaces are never good, because ISIS will find their way to these ungoverned spaces. And so, but the day after is going to be the key, and this is only chapter 1.
Right, Rosa, what do you think? I mean, will we see the militants that belong to ISIL, will they just completely melt into the population, wait for this to be over, and then re-emerge in another spot, which, as Afshin tells us, could be a space which is ungoverned?
Absolutely, I agree with that line of reasoning, because that is the whole growth of ISIL and its affiliates has been largely due to the ungoverned spaces that are found now in Iraq and Syria. And, you know, the whole idea of state building after the US invasion of Iraq has completely fallen flat, and that is the urgent priority that needs to be taken care of. Now they have Libya, another place where they have been regrouping. The Al-Qaeda has also shifted there. They have Yemen, which is under great stress and conflict. So there are many spaces. I think what really is important to understand is that these patchy, you know, military interventions can only have a very limited impact. The real issue here is to get a kind of consensus between the major powers like Russia and the US and others as to prevent the regrouping and further strengthening of groups like ISIS. And that requires state building, and that is an urgent priority that international community must not abandon after, you know, exiting Iraq.
Wang Guan, when we talk about state building, is that an acknowledgement in some way that there's no military solution to this? I mean, you can bomb ISIL as long as you want to, but they're not going to go away. That ultimately you are going to need some kind of political way out of this.
Right, I think peacemaking was always easier compared to peace building, because it involves the institutions of the country. When, like Afshin said, when you topple a leadership and when you subvert a regime, it might be easy, but what's going to be after? You know, what should be followed? What should be followed? That is really the hard part. So I think that it takes lots of stakeholders for, you know, to involve Russia, to involve China, to first of all to build the legitimacy for the involvement itself. Because let's not forget, when the U.S. intervened in Iraq back in 2003, it was the coalition of the willing, or so it was called. So first of all, to have legitimacy, and then to engage really a broad coalition of partners across the ideological spectrum globally. And then really to put development and building of institutions such as public sanitary stations, you know, courts, and also schools, those kind of institutions ready first.
Magnus, ISIL has shown itself to be a very brutal group, but it's also a very resilient group. And I'm wondering what would happen if it is defeated on the battlefield, let's say in Iraq or in Syria. Will they then take their battle to the streets of Europe and the streets of the United States?
Like you said yourself, I think it's very difficult to say what will happen. And the war on terror is always going on, and the battlefields are not only in Syria and Iraq. And I think it's you know, hardcore politics that can win the war, and it will be difficult to say what the European nations will do after this battle, because, like you say, it's a very big moment in the war, and I think the nations will have to have a very good cooperation, and hopefully after the elections here in the US, we will have a president that can lead the process where a very good foreign cooperation will be as a strongest weapon in this war.
Okay, let's look at another story that's been making news these past few weeks, and that is Philippines. President Rodrigo Duterte has turned things on its head. He's been to China. He's paid a visit to China, and he says he wants to disentangle his country's very strengths with the United States. Is this, Wang Guan, a major diplomatic victory for China?
Well, I think that was quite unexpected in the first place, that the Philippines had a new president right after a relatively unfavorable ruling against China by The Hague with the sea. And then we have this Filipino president who went very vocal about voicing his concerns against the established military alignment between U.S. and the Philippines. which was also to the thrill and excitement of the Chinese leadership. And then later, Chinese diplomatic community certainly seized on this opportunity and engaged President Duterte and invited him to China. And then there we saw the visit, which was quite successful. And from what I heard from back home, most Chinese are, they fell into two camps. For one, they're really excited about this new prospect of China-Filipino relationship. But on the other hand, some people are quite, cautious about it. When President Duterte said there's going to be a separation between U.S. and Philippines, Beijing really wanted him to clarify what this separation means. Does it mean that you will kick the tens of thousands of U.S. troops out, stop receiving hundreds of millions of military aid from the U.S., or does it just mean that you will have a more friendly relationship with China and then there will be status quo when it comes to U.S.-Filipino military alliance? So I think that we would like to have more clarification when President Duterte said those things that he said.
And Afshin, if we look at it from the United States, here we have President Duterte, who's basically pivoted away from the United States to China. Does that tell us something about the United States and its relationship with the region? Is the U.S. star fading in Asia?
I think it's very interesting because as you know, the U.S. has been talking about this pivot to Asia for quite some time, and some countries have received it warmly, like Japan and South Korea, and others have not received it as warmly, like China and perhaps, and in this case, Philippines. But Duterte, in many ways, some people are calling him the Donald Trump of Asia. He shoots from the hip, he rips up the playbook, he threatens long-standing alliances, and I think that's what's happening. But what's also happening is he needs to be careful with his rhetoric, because the Philippines has also been a darling of international emerging markets investors over the past few years, and this kind of rhetoric creates a great deal of uncertainty.
Well, he is getting a lot of investment out of China.
That's right. Yeah. Well, he may. Let's see. But the big institutional investors have been talking about the Philippines in the same breath as some of the other big emerging markets, and this concerns them.
Raza Rumi, one of the big foreign policy initiatives of the Obama administration has been this pivot to Asia. What happens now when we see what the Philippines is doing? Has President Duterte seriously undermined U.S. foreign policy objectives in that region?
Well, I would not really say that he has seriously undermined, but certainly what he is doing is a clear sort of threat to the U.S. vision of its future role and influence in Asia as Obama presidency ends. And it is, in broader terms, it is also now a clear manifestation of the fact that the world is no longer unipolar, and that in this multipolar and distributed power centers, China has a major role from the region onto the global stage. And while the Philippines president is known for making some very provocative statements, and he's also a populist strongman type figure, but certainly he is playing his cards rather well, because we were earlier talking about the whole anti-establishment mood in so many countries, and so is the case with the Philippines, where the democratic structures have been extremely corrupt and compromised and preserved of a very narrow elite, and who have been historically aligned with the U.S. So there is a domestic angle as well, but certainly what it shows in many countries, including the Philippines, that it is the rise of China, which is now a reality to be contended with.
Magnus, how does a country like Iceland see the United States? We see these anti-American demonstrations around the world, a lot of people calling the United States a warmonger nation, yet we do have lots of other people who say that, yes, we do need a strong United States. It's essential for international stability, for international order. What kind of sentiment do you hear?
Yeah, I would say in Iceland, I think it's they are looking at the United States as their allies, and also it's very important to have a very good president who is very good in foreign policy and foreign cooperation with other nations, and it's of course very, very important for small nations and bigger nations like Iceland, And so I think there are many nations, small and big as well, who are looking at the United States now when we have 10 days to the elections, and just wondering what will happen if you have a guy like Trump as a president, but it's, you know, everyone can understand that the United States are the biggest economy in the world and etc. But it's difficult, you know, how to explain how scared people are with Trump.
Okay, well, the last part of our show right now, and that's the next big story. Let's get it from four of you. Magnus, let me start with you. What's the next big story?
I think the next big story will be policy on innovation. Politicians and economies as well will have to tackle our rapid development when it comes to technology. We can see self-driving cars hitting the streets, and there's a lot of things going on that can change our economies and our lives. I think this will be a very big case in the next 1 or 2 years, and after a few months we will see politicians talking about this much more.
Yeah, self-driving vehicles, that's going to be a big thing. I saw a report on a self-driving beer truck this weekend. They got their priorities right. Raza Rumi, what's the next big story?
Oh, well, I think there are many stories, but I would say if on the world's politics and the larger sort of global scene, I think Russia and if after the US election is over, I mean, I think that's the next brewing tension that we have to deal with for some time.
Okay, gentlemen, you guys have 20
What will China's new foreign policy be? Because we just had a new plenum of the 18th Party Congress that established Xi further as the Chinese leader, as the leader, first among equals. So we'll see how he will steer the Chinese foreign policy forward.
Okay,
Middle-class anxieties driving populist candidates from the left and the right in the advanced economies, and increasingly middle-class anxieties in the emerging economies.
Okay, and we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.